Well, your band of faces coming in.
It's good to see a lot of familiar faces.
Karen, you're new. Hi. What? Karen?
Hello?
Hi, Karen.
Yes.
You're kind of a new face. You can want to introduce yourself? Tell us. You know most of the other people.
Yeah. I'm Karen German. I'm just watching this because I wanted to learn more about the game that my son plays.
And how old's your son?
He just turned 16.
16. He's still a bit of player.
He's been playing since he was 3, though.
It's okay. Fantastic. Well, I'm glad you joined us.
Thank you.
We've got coaches that we know. We've got Don, JR, Colin, Corey, Laurie. Is that Mark? And Brian? The Pinions come on, they're like a ghost team. They just sit there. And there we go. We got an unmute. Which Pinion are we talking to? That we don't know. Okay. So in respect to Janet's time, we will have a little conversation about how to watch a game and all of the things that are maybe surrounding that. So Janet, as you can see, is at the University of Illinois and has been there for 18 years. And in the world of college athletics, that is pat on the back material right out of the gate. A lot of experiences there. If we go just to the next slide, because we'll put this one back up as we're talking. So Janet's not your usual run-of-the-mill soccer coach who came through the physical education world. She actually has a science degree and has actually worked in the real world outside of the coaching world. But she had spent time at University of Arkansas before going to Illinois. And as you look at some of her past positions, president of what's the United Soccer Coaches, or NSCAA, worked for the Federation as a staff coach, worked for Region 2 in the Olympic development as a head regional coach, been involved with the national teams over the years, and as a scout for the World Cup and Olympic team. So that's just for fun as in her adult life. Where it gets really interesting, and I think adds a lot of context to this, is when we start to look at, do you remember that far back, Janet?
Yeah. I looked at that and I said, I was just going to say, could you maybe put that stuff up there without the dates? That would make it seem a little bit more, a little bit more exciting if it just had the accomplishments and not the dates. But
I actually think that's a credit to you.
Appreciate that. But
yeah, go on.
I was just going to say, fortunately, I think right now I can still remember back that far. So.
I don't think those will never leave you. So Janet was on the first North Carolina team that won actually the back-to-back championships when it became an NCAA sport. But the piece at the bottom, I think, just gives a little bit of context of who we're on the phone with. And in the bottom 4 categories, the only person, at least one of the people who are ahead of her at University of North Carolina as a player is Mia Hamm. So if you're looking for, who's Janet? Yeah, she coaches at Illinois. Maybe just keeping in context, only Mia Hamm, and who was the other one in front of that?
April Heinrichs.
Oh, of course. So me and April, the only 2 that are ahead of Janet. That's probably pretty good company to be in. Anyway.
Well, the fact that we've had 2 of those 3 on is pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's true. We've had April. April was our first guest.
Oh, fantastic.
Yep. So that's great. So we want to talk, Brad, just flip back because Janet can bask in her former glory there. We want to talk about how to watch a game, and because we have a limited number of people, and I think our number is 15, okay, so maybe it'll grow on it too. We'll keep it unmuted, and if you would like to ask a question that does not include something to do with COVID and restarts, you are more than welcome. If there's a direction that comes up and you just have a curiosity, feel free to jump in and we'll keep it open and involved that way. So otherwise I will start as rolling. And the first question I would like for Janet to think about was the idea of a vision of the game. And how old were you, or what was the period of time in coaching, or before coaching maybe, when you thought, I know what I want this game to look like? And then maybe it wasn't a coaching piece at that point. We'll get to that in a minute. But at what point in your head did you think, I've got a sense of what I want this to look like?
I think a lot changed for me, Tom, when I was really fortunate early in my kind of coaching career to scout for the 1995 Women's World Cup in Sweden. Lauren Gregg was the assistant coach with Tony at the time. And I think having to analyze the game at that level and to break it down and to realize that countries had ways to play the game that matched their cultural identity or matched their physiological homogeneity. I mean, Japan plays the way they play because there's a very homogeneous physical and physiological entity there that they have to deal with. I think as the US, we don't necessarily have those restrictions from a physiological standpoint. And, so I think I started to think, well, what are the strengths of the team that I have? What are the strengths that I bring to the table? What does that look like when you start to put it on the field? And, I think it's evolved for me a little bit too, in terms of what my vision is. I think there was a period of time where I said, this is how I want the game to look. This is the system I'm comfortable with. This is how we're going to coach it. This is how we're going to play. But then if you take individual players and you put them in that system, you start to sort of, it morphs into something that allows the players to play within that, but to do what they're best at. So I think I started with the system first and fit the players to it. And I still do that a little bit because it affects your recruiting bias. But what I've really done is said, okay, here's the players and the strengths I have. How can I put them in a system and develop a style of play that really plays to their strengths? And so the vision is always evolving based on the players that you have to work with. It's very different. And I'll give you an example. 2 years back to back, we had two very, very good goalkeepers. One was 5'9" and great, coming for a cross. The other one was a Canadian national team kid, but she was 5'6" and great on breakaways. We played the same system, but how we played defensively and where we forced teams and all that sort of stuff was very different based on the strengths of those two players. And so I think scouting in 1995 really just made me aware of how much I could help the players be able to play in a way that really played to their strength based on the vision that I had of how I was going to put this puzzle together.
Interesting. So you've, one of the questions I was going to ask you later, it may be timely now. Are you more comfortable now changing systems within game, or do you keep the same sort of basic structure? Are you much more comfortable moving in and out of systems because now you're much more experienced in the game? Yeah.
Right. So here's what I would say, though. Moving in and out of systems isn't based on my comfort level. It's based on my team's comfort level. Yeah. Right. And so for us, and again, this is, I think, very probably somewhat specific to the college game. We have a really short prep time relative to especially if you're bringing freshmen into the mix and they're going to be an impact. So I think once we sort of choose our system, I think we try to keep it simple within a season. So the bulk of choosing a system is kind of done prior to the season. And then once we have that, then it's how are we going to tweak that in game to take advantage of different things. So let's say, we might be playing a 3-5-2 might be our primary system. Well, if we're going to try to adjust that because we're down a goal, then we're going to adjust from that. So we wouldn't just completely go, it's easier probably to do an example defensively. If we were ahead and we were going to, kind of sit on that and rest people and whatnot, if we were in a 3-5-2, we're probably going to look at maybe going to a 5-4-1 because it's much easier to adjust. We drop the two outside people back. It's an adjustment to the system that we're comfortable with. So I think most seasons now we kind of have a base system that we modify in game based on the situation, but the structure stays pretty how we adjust that depends on what our base system is that we've chosen for that particular team and the players that play it.
So there's a formation, and then there is then the roles that change, whether it's attacking, defending, when it's situational changes, and then roles then within the formation will change based on the game.
Yeah, and we might change the formation. Like I said, we might go from a 3-5-2 to a 4-5-1. And add another center back, but it doesn't, that's our secondary system, right? So I think, but it isn't drastically different how our midfield operates, where we're doing things. Our line of confrontation may change, but the roles of our midfield don't change. Whereas if you completely changed and went to a 4-4-2 and you're playing with a 2 front instead of a 3 front, that drastically changes tactical decisions within that game. So if we're playing a 3-5-2, we're probably going to stick to a 2 front or a 1 front. We're not all of a sudden going to go to a 4-3-3.
And because you're talking about integrating new people, clearly that's difficult within the framework of a short season. Again, I'm looking at this historically. How have you evolved being able to say, okay, this is my ideas on the game. These are the players. How do I get them ready to play? And it's partly introducing freshmen, and it's partly just now preparing the team to play. But there's what you do now, and there's the historical context of how coaches evolve over time. So that becomes a curiosity for me, because we've got people who are at different levels of experience, and the evolution is the fun part of it, and knowing that we do evolve. So just with the standpoint of what's happened over time, just getting your team better prepared to play games through practice.
It's been one of these where I didn't know as much, so I kept it simple for them. Then I knew a lot, so I got really, really complicated and now I'm like, you know what, I know a lot, but they don't, so I'm back down here saying, and this is, I think this is what we've gone back to, is the game is the game, and the principles of the game don't change regardless of the system you play. So I think what we've really done is there's 2 or 3 things that I think are really important when we bring someone in. The first thing we do is talk language. What's our language? What do we mean when we say line of confrontation? What do we mean when we say press? What do we mean when we say pressure? Let's define what pressure on the ball means. What do we mean when we say, if we have pressure on the ball, organize around it. If we don't, organize behind it. What does that language mean? Because I'm going to say that all the time. That sounds really simple, but I need to make sure that everybody understands. So we start, first of all, with language, because again, I think that can make it really clear or unclear. If I say something, and based on their 16 years of soccer experience that they've had, and maybe they've played for the same coach all their lives, that to them means something different than what my definition of that is. So so on both sides of the ball, we talk about language. We define things. What's a diagonal run? What's an off the shoulder run? What's this run? What's that run? And why would it apply in certain situations? So I think we go back to principles of the game first, and then show them how those principles apply in whatever the tactical vision is that we're going to implement for that, and how those principles that they've had from get-go. I'm not changing the principles. I might give them a different name. The language may be different, but the principles are the same. And then how do those apply to the different elements? How are you going to defend in this situation? Around the ball, away from the ball. So I think, Tom, I was on a call earlier today with Chris Peterson, the football coach from University of Washington, and he said, master educators are really good at simplifying the complex concepts, and that is absolutely true. One of the things that we want to do, and when you talk about style, I think one of your questions was, what does a Janet Rayfield coach team look like? I hope they look like players that are making decisions for themselves. I hope they're intelligent and they're reading the game. And in order to do that, I think you really have to simplify things for them. And I hope that soccer becomes a a multiple choice exam, so to speak, that they can go, yeah, here's my options, and here's the one I think is the best in the moment, and I'm going to now go and execute that.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, Tom. This is Lori Williams. I had a quick kind of follow-up question, if you don't mind. I was wondering, we're in the process of building a player handbook for that exact reason. Would you be at all willing to potentially share like your vocabulary or your term sheet or your languages that you use in terms of like, not even like what the definitions are, but what is it that you have to have as standardized within the Illini program?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to, kind of have a PowerPoint that we go through with, and there's two things I think that are really important. It's language in terms of concepts. So what does this mean? And then actual language that we're going to use. What are you expected to say to a teammate when they're, if you're going to go pressure the ball, right? It's expected that you say, I got ball with some, or the word ball is used in that. You're talking about yourself. So don't tell someone else to go pressure the ball, because if you say ball, we're going to think you're talking about yourself. If you say step, then you're talking to someone else. Hey, step there. So even that the language we're going to use and the concepts that we're going to talk about, both are part of that language course and language definition piece that we start with at the very beginning. So there's words associated and concepts associated with those, but I'm happy to share those, Lori.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lori. Excellent. This is a question about opponents, Janet, when we're getting maybe towards the game, coaching the game itself. Do you watch the opponent? Is that an assistant's job to watch the opponent? And I'm going back into this historical piece. Was there a time when you were looking at games as a young coach and you weren't watching the opponent at all because it was all your own team's focus, or were you just smarter than everybody else because you got those degrees in the tech world?
And again, I think the 1995 World Cup for me was an eye-opening. I mean, having to scout, scouting in college ranks prior to that was almost non-existent. You didn't have video to look at. You might call another coach and get what we would call a scouting report back then, right? You call and say, hey, what system did they play? Who were their 2 or 3 best players? You might get an inkling of information. And here's the challenge about scouting. And this is, I sometimes laugh at the number of coaches who spend hours and hours and hours studying, let's say, my team to get ready to play them, because college athletes are about as consistent as any other on a day-to-day basis. So, I mean, I think at the national team level, where you've got consistency and style of play and players and substitution rules, scouting becomes a huge piece of the equation. Absolutely. And so in 95, when I was scouting down to the nth degree, and I mean, this is back before technology, so I still have somewhere in a file cabinet, I have legal pads that I literally was writing notes and drawing restarts out and sending those via a fax machine to Lauren Gregg on the other side of Sweden. But when you start to pick apart an opponent like that intensely, you do realize that there are certain things that you can look for in an opponent. So, Tom, back to your question, when the game starts, all of us as coaches have kind of our areas to look at, and I would say we look at both teams. And so it's more what's going on in our attacking third, both offensively and defensively. So, how are we able to break them down? But then are they breaking us down in that third? As opposed to me looking at all parts of my team and them looking at all parts of their team, I'm really looking at the areas that I've been, I do a lot of our attacking stuff. So I kind of look at the attacking third. Jeff does a lot of our defending. He kind of looks at the defensive third. Our goalkeeper coach is really looking at it from that perspective. And so, I think, but it's both. It's, what aren't we doing that we're capable of doing? Are we following a game plan? There was the game plan we gave them, and the game plan is derived. How do our strengths match up against what we feel like based on the scouting report is not a weakness of theirs, but somewhere where our strength outdoes their strength. Where are the mismatches? And then when you're in the game, you're going, is that mismatch really happening? Did they adjust to us because of their scouting report? And if so, how can we reframe things so that the thing that we're really trying to do, because that's what happens when you're scouting. This is what this team tries to do. Can we take it away? So they're going to be trying to take something away from us. Well, is that giving us something else? We're trying to take something away from them. Did they adjust to try to take something else? So I think that's sort of the perspective that you have at the college level.
So Janet, can I just want to follow up with that? How much time, because you talked about simplicity as such a key, is making sure the players are comfortable and in charge. How much time do you devote prior to a game on an opposition scouting report, or is that more internal to the coaching staff to be able to make decisions game time?
Brad, I would say exactly that. I would say that the amount of time spent scouting is much more internal. I would say we know a whole lot more about what we think is going to happen, what we think the opponent's going to do, than we actually give the players. Our scouting report is, we usually do I would call it a digital one, sitting at a chalkboard or sitting behind video clips and a PowerPoint that says, hey, and then we usually walk through something on the field the day before. So I would say we spend with the team hour and a half between those two things, maybe, before, in terms of giving them information about an opponent. But that is collated from probably several hours of looking at tape, talking to other coaches, looking at all the statistical reports that are generated now, whether that's through, there's all these different companies now out there, Instat and Huddle, and all these people that will accumulate statistics on teams. So you look at all of those things and you do your best guess of but again, you're looking for, hey, they like to play a really high restraining line. Okay, well, that's really good for us because, we've got a player that's got really good pace and really good timing over runs. Let's see if we can take advantage of that. And then you step out and play them, and their line's not leaving the top of the penalty box. Okay, now we've got to adjust to that. Because they go, wait, we've got this, Illinois' got this really fast kid who times or runs well, so let's drop our line back. So that there's the chess match. And it's no different than it was 25 years ago. It happens prior to the game starting, than having to happen, oh gosh, this has happened in the game itself. You just kind of have the moves are probably played out a little bit ahead of time.
Are the players smarter than they were? More game savvy. That maybe not smart, not intellectually, but just game awareness, game savviness. Are you able to do things with them that you couldn't?
I think they have, and again, it's a double-edged sword. I think they've seen more games. They've seen more. They've talked about the game more. It's a more common language, because there's more games on TV. There's more. But I think in terms of reading the game and making decisions about it, Tom, I'm going to say that's almost less. I know that sounds, but I think the more that they've been, so when I was growing up, no one knew anything about the game, so they kind of threw a ball out there and let us play. I was very fortunate to play for an Italian man who was an amazing coach from that standpoint. But now things are so scripted and so organized, and they tend to look at the coach and go, what do you want me to do here? They've been told what to do, but not why they're doing it in a lot of situations, right? We're playing this system and you're going to do this. And if this happens, do this. And if that happens, do this. And then, you hear the coach screaming from the sideline, do this, pass it to so-and-so, do it. So I think they have more experience, but I don't know that translates to more functional knowledge necessarily. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's, and the knock-on effect that is, we become a less soccer savvy soccer culture because fewer and fewer players are able to process the game on their own or read the game, so they're now looking for direction instead of, I'm reading this and I'm doing this because I've got enough experience and enough latitude that the coaches have let me think And what I think you're telling me is there's too many coaches who don't let the players think or don't help them think. So now we end up with people who want to be told what to do.
Yeah.
Would that be fair or unfair?
Yeah, I do. I think that that's, you know, I think that that's a challenge is that, and it's not, you know, I also think that that's a real comfort for the players. It's so much easier as a player to just be told what to do in a certain situation. And in some sports that works great. You know, you're playing football, you know, run 10 yards, turn right, run 10 yards, turn left, run 10 yards, turn around, catch the ball that's going to be thrown to you. And if you do that, you've got a good chance of success. You know, I think our sport is so much. One of the best coaching books I've ever read is a book called Developing Decision Makers. It's written by, it's a rugby book, but rugby is very much a free-flowing sport like ours. And so I think that's, you know, it's you're simplifying things and you're trying to teach them to make decisions, and it kind of walks you through that process.
Lynn Kidman.
Yes. Lynn Kidman. Yep. Mm-hmm. Followed up with a book called Athlete-Centered Coaching is the sequel to that book. Also very good.
Fantastic. They may be the best books I've ever read.
It's probably the one that's, if you talk about one of my dog-eared coaching books, Developing Decision Makers, because I go back to that because it guides you with some of the questions that you can ask. Again, listening to a podcast the other day, a lot of us are Socratic, and I have, after listening to the podcast, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have fallen into this myself. I'm asking questions, but they don't want to answer. They just want me to go ahead and answer it, you know, and you know, so I've got to you know, I got to make sure that I'm asking the question that says, you know, asking what did you see here versus what, you know, is there pressure on the ball there? Now I've just kind of given them the answer. And so, you know, it's how you ask those questions and how you respond to that. You know, I got some great feedback from my staff because some of our athletes, we felt like we're kind of being fearful to make decisions. And part of that, the feedback was, Janet, you know so much about the game. They're intimidated by that knowledge, and therefore they know they don't know as much as you do. So they are assuming that their answer is not going to be right, that you're going to know more, you know. So I really have to make sure I'm where they are in terms of their knowledge base and allow them to not know everything that I know, or be able to see things from that perspective. And I have to slowly guide them to that level of expertise. And so, you know, that's something that I would say I'm still evolving as a coach, because like I said, my knowledge was here with them and we could travel together, and now my knowledge is up here, but I still have to be able to coach where they are. And that's an important challenge when you're trying to get them to make decisions. And not ask you, well, what do you think I should do here? You know more than I do. I was like, I might know more, but I am not on the field, and I can't strike the ball to pass the ball where I think it should go. You have to make the decision with the knowledge that you have, and you should be free to do that. And just because we talk about it afterwards about other options that you might have, that doesn't mean that you were wrong in the moment. As long as you did the best you could and thought that was the best decision, then we're going to go with that.
Fun maps, number one, working hard, best they can do.
You know, again, somebody said, you know, best decision you can and commit to it. If you didn't make a decision and you didn't commit to it, then there's no evaluation of that decision after the fact, because unless you committed to it, you don't really know whether it worked or not. So you got to make a decision and commit to it, and then we can evaluate it. And so I think that's part of it, is getting them to do that on a regular basis, and then kind of self-reflect and evaluate it and move on to the next one.
Hey, Janet, John Orozco here from
Hi, John.
Toledo. Good to see you. Good to
see you.
Good to hear your voice. Greetings from Steve Malone, by the way, who I just spoke to today. So, but I had a question here. I typed in, do you find the characteristics that Tom was talking about, that he referenced, to be somewhat cultural? I mean, by that I mean, do we see that foreign players have more of an apt to try some things out and not fear the reaction from a coach versus the American player, the American-born player, or is that a simplistic approach on my end?
I don't think think it's all that simplistic, John, because I do think, and again, I wouldn't say it's foreign born or American, although it does divide on those lines a lot. I think it's based on the experience they had. I mean, there are some club systems and some environments that they come through here that are very, really try to develop players and give and empower them to make decisions and to do. And I do think on the foreign side of things, I think American coaches and American players were very much brought up in a, this is how you do things because I said so kind of environment. And so, because most American sports are like that, basketball run plays and the coach calls them. Baseball, if there's 2 outs and a man on first and second, this is exactly what you do. And so I think from those American sports comes this, the coach is going to tell me what to do and I'm just going to execute that. I think foreign players come out of an environment where it's not necessarily that. They've been involved with rugby and soccer and those sports that aren't coach driven, that are player driven, and they've been coached in a player driven fashion. And they've had conversations about the game from that perspective. And I think that gives them that sort of open-mindedness and that freedom to make decisions and to feel like that's what they should be doing on the field. And that's the way they've been coached.
Can you just pause if anyone else would like to get a thought off their mind before I move along? You okay? Going once, going twice. All right, so let's go into the game itself, Janet. I wrote down a question about describing your sideline personality. So what's Janet Rayfield like on the sidelines, and how does that impact players' reactions? Against the other coach at times?
Right. And this, again, I think, Tom, is an evolution. I think, I've gone from being as emotionally invested on the sidelines as I was as a player on the field. I think that's one of the hardest transitions, is to come off the field. As a player, your emotion impacts the game. And I think as a coach, I wanted to impact the game in that same way. And so I was emotionally tied to the game and tied to the moments. And now I think the thing I've been able to do is put myself in this mode most of the time. One of your later questions asks if the opponent coach impacts that. It is the opponent coach that usually knocks me off of this line, not my team or whatever. Because then I can be intentional. I can be intentional about everything. It doesn't mean that I'm sitting there flat necessarily, but if I get up and get fired up on the sidelines in a positive way or a negative way, or I'm on my team, like trying to, really get them in, hey, we got to work harder here. It's an intentional decision, not an emotional response. So I think that's what I try to be as a coach, even going into halftime. Like if I'm going to storm around the locker room and throw a clipboard, it is fabricated at this point in my career. It is no longer an emotional response. It doesn't mean I don't do it, but it is an intentional, I need to fire my team up. And the only way I'm going to do that is to be angry. And I make this conscious decision to have an angry, demeanor going into the locker room, or I make a conscious decision to have a calm demeanor going into the locker room, even though we might be down. And the same is true on the sidelines. Every once in a while, and a lot of times it's, I'll look at Jeff, or Jeff will look at me and he goes, we need to get some energy here. And he'll get up off the bench and start to really get things that I can stay emotionally, unengaged and really, I'm an analyzer, I'm a computer programmer, I'm a problem solver. And so, that emotional piece. So that allows me to do that. And he can really, his sideline things often have to do with what's our energy level? Do we need to calm down? Do we need to get ramped up? And his sideline behavior sort of does that. And I can stay in my problem solving mode. What's the tactical adjustments? That's my strength. What's the tactical adjustments that we might be able to make here? And how can we do it with a player, with a comment to somebody, with our leader that I can look at and say, hey, let's move our line of confrontation up a little bit, things like that. So But one of my former administrative assistant secretary that was, worked with football for 20 years and came over and was a secretary for, 50 years of her 70-year-old self, said to me, "What do you do during games? You just sit there." And I said, that's a good thing, actually. The more I sit there, the more it means I've done my job during the week. But she's like, every other coach of every other sport I've seen is up running around doing things, and you just sit in your chair. Now, she's far enough away she can't hear me scream from my chair. But it is like, it's a player's game, and I think my sideline behavior is to try to facilitate that. I will say this too. It has changed a little bit in that when I can look at a camera from up above, I actually have a little bit more input into maybe what's going on. Our seat on the sidelines looking at the game from this horizontal position is horrible. I can't see how much space is between my two center backs, really. I'm looking at them from the wrong angle. I can kind of see the space between the lines, but not really. So you really have to rely on the players to see and to understand what's going on in the game. And so my sideline demeanor is it's intentional. I wouldn't say it's always the same. I wouldn't say it's flatline, but I would say it's intentional. I'm trying to respond to things, respond to my team. And I think someone typed in there, respond, don't react. And that's definitely the evolution of myself as a coach.
At times as the younger version, that the emotional side, you forgot what was going on or didn't recognize what was happening in the game, and that helped the evolution? Are we always a little calmer?
I think I've always been a little bit calmer as a person, but I think, I just think, I think you came to the, and I think probably it started probably in that halftime moment. I would feel some sort of emotion and just go with that emotion instead of it being thoughtful. I will say the other thing that probably change that is if you go back and watch a game, here's what I would say: we are never as good as I thought we were or as bad as I thought we were. So the emotions that you feel in the game are so skewed by outcome and results, right? You win 4-0. You think, oh yeah, we played great. That was awesome. And you go back and watch the tape and you're like, we played like crap, except for we scored 4 great goals because somebody did something. But as a whole, we played horrible. But after the game, I'm like, yay, we did great. So I think results fed emotions, which fed the wrong kind of, so I think I've been able to take results out of my evaluation a little bit, take emotions out, and just be much more analytical towards the game. But part of that's the evolution, that results aren't the end all be all for me anymore. And maybe because, as I've said with some colleagues, because I'm on the back nine and I know what happened on the front nine, and I've won enough games that I feel okay with whatever happens on the back nine.
Go back after the game. What's the process? Because clearly we have perceptions of the game that sometimes you watch, like you say, and you think that's not what I thought I saw. What's the process after the game when you're now final whistle goes? You said thank yous. Now what? What's the process?
I think my first thing is try to say very little immediately because of that. Because until you really go back and watch it, whatever you say in that moment after the game could be very detrimental if it's not in line with what actually kind of happened on the field. So I think I walk around, our team does their thing, they do whatever, win or lose, they're in their circle stretching. I walk around, I don't know what I'm going to do now because maybe we can't touch hands, but I sort of high five every player as they're in that stretching circle. One, to acknowledge everybody, whether they played or not. And two, it gives me time to think and to cool down and to sort of, whether it's the, big emotions of a big win or, whatever my emotions are, kind of let them go. And I kind of acknowledge the emotions of how they might be feeling. If we've just lost a close game, kind of acknowledge the emotions, not try to evaluate the performance. So in that huddle right after, I think it's more acknowledging the emotions so that you can, in the next day, move on from those emotions. And then the analysis, starts. And so then you can go back and look at, okay, what was our performance really like? Was our game plan wrong? Or do we just not execute it well? Was it the preparation leading up into that game? Were we flat? Were we, did it look to be physical, technical, tactical, or psychological? And how can we make quick adjustments and move on to the next game? Because the college process is, you play on Thursday now, got an extra day in there, which helps, and you got to turn around and play again on Sunday against a different opponent with a different style. So, how can we move on from that, help players be better? And again, I was watching a podcast the other day, and someone said, make sure the film session that you do, whether it's with a team or individual, isn't for you to kind of explain why you made, it's not, don't let it be cathartic for you. Make sure it's educational for them, because they do sometimes think that we analyze the game and we have this long film session. We could have done this. We should have done this. We should have done that. And it's actually cathartic for you, but not necessarily helpful for the players.
So what do you do with the film? Do you give them little snips? Do they get stuff on their phone? Like all the kids of today, they want the 30-second soundbite piece?
Yeah. So, all of the above, to be honest, Tom. I mean, I think, again, players are different. They learn differently. And some of them they'll be on their device, whatever that is, phone, computer, laptop. They have access to the game. Some of them will go back and they will watch the game themselves from start to finish. And they've already analyzed our performance, their performance. Some haven't logged in the entire season. They've seen what we've shown them, during a team film session. And I don't fault them for that necessarily. I think everybody learns a little bit differently, from that standpoint. So, but yeah, I think we try, whether it's statistics or video, I think we try to, and again, you're trying to simplify things, but you're trying to get everybody on the same page. So I would say most of the time it's, well, if I were to break up my week, or break up our week, when it comes to the video part, we'll clip we'll clip the game, and we may have 5 or 6 clips that we want the whole team to see, and so those will be loaded up and they can watch those, but we'll probably watch them as a group. And then there's a lot of times that, I'll take the forwards and we'll really pick apart the runs that we made, and we'll take the midfielders and then we'll take the backs, and so we can do things and get a little bit more interaction. So I would say there's one positional kind of film session, there's one kind of team film session, and then there's the odd individual one who really wants to come in and watch game, tape of themselves or tape of someone else. You've got someone who's not playing a lot, they'll come in and watch. Can I come in and watch tape of the midfielders so I get better even in a practice environment? We're going to be set up for the first time when we get the new facility to be able to actually do practice video as well. And I think that'll be a game changer, because that's where I think so much of the development takes place, to be able to look at everybody's decisions that they make in those where it's the principles of the game that matter. And again, practice is unemotional. You can really look at decisions, and you can look at your decision in that environment instead of your decision and how it impacted the outcome of the game. Because sometimes the right decision ends up with the wrong result. And so you're evaluating you're saying it was a bad decision when really it wasn't. It just happened to not work out and impact things in a negative way, so to speak.
Janet, I had a question about players and you to dial back to halftime and post game. And you said halftime, obviously there has to be analysis, and post game it's more about validating emotions. How much do you include the players' feedback in your halftime analysis, and then post game to the players? What window do you provide for them to speak to the larger group?
Right. Halftime. So our halftime process, the players will go into the locker room, and we intentionally stay out of there for a given period of time. 2 purposes to that. One, we have a conversation about what we think. I've been watching this and Jeff's been watching that, and obviously we've had conversations throughout the half, but kind of gather our thoughts as to what we think are the most critical things, and then have a group conversation about what the emotion should be going into that locker room, because that's helpful in terms of making it intentional. I might feel really angry and he might feel this way and Lisa might feel some other way. So having a conversation about that makes it intentional in terms of what's going to be our kind of our emotion walking into the locker room. But that's also giving the players some time to discuss the problems that they see. And there have been some seasons where there's kind of been a leader for our back line and a midfield. And so those groups will sort of get together and kind of talk about things. But the first question I ask when I walk into the locker room, usually at halftime, is what do you see? Because if I start addressing problems that they don't think exist, or I spend my whole halftime talking, and then at the end, someone's like, but wait a minute, this is happening all the time. And what are we going to do to solve that? And now I've run out of time to talk about that, right? Because I start talking about the problems I've seen. So that's the first question is, hey, what do you guys think? And so kind of address anything that they are concerned about or have noticed or want to know about before we ever kind of get to what we're talking about. And normally they're interrelated. Normally I can take something that they've seen and tie it to something that we needed to address and tie those two things together. And then it looks like they came up with I can ask them questions about, well, how do you think we should solve that? And again, they're bought into that solution because it was a problem they saw and a solution they came up with, and that's the best case scenario. And there are times where just because of the limited time at halftime, sometimes you just have to say, okay, that's the problem, and I think here's how we can solve it. And not have time to have the conversations.
Do you think about the game when you're discussing it with the team? Have you got the game broken down by halves, by thirds, by lines, by players? What's the structure that you use to, in some ways, coach the game, instruct it, practice, observe the game?
Yeah. So for us, and part of this probably has to do with our style of play. So we talk a lot, Tom, about the front 60 and the back 40. And here's why. We really feel like if we can win the ball back in the front 60% of the field, so roughly from the bottom of the center circle to the goal we're attacking, that's the front 60. So we'll talk about attacking in the front 60, attacking in the back 40, defending in the front 60, defending in the back 40. Like there's kind of the four elements that we kind of look at and that we sort of address, because that really, we're trying to win the ball in the front 60% of the field. And we can look at stats at halftime that says, yeah, we're doing that 75% of the time. Okay, we're good there. Then let's talk about why that's happening and what's good about that. We're not. They keep kicking it over us, and we're winning it in the back 40. We're winning it. They're not creating chances, but we're not winning it in the front 60. Okay, how can we do that? Can we push our line up and get? So that front 60, back 40 has been more helpful for us than thirds, because it kind of makes the thirds connected a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
So I'd say that's how we do it. Yeah.
You'll have the flexibility to just think in terms of the way you want your teams and the spaces you want to play in. There's no, it's just an arbitrary instead of practical.
Right. And to me, the back 40 offensively, you're just trying to establish a place where you can build from. Once you get into the front 60, now you're really actually trying to attack. So it's that front 60, back 40 on both sides of the ball really help. So just last week, the last 2 weeks, but when we could talk to the exam before exams hit, we actually had our team present in a Zoom thing with clips. They had to pull clips in. We had 4 groups: defending in the front 60, defending in the back 40, attacking in the front 60, attacking in the back 40. And each group had to present on one of those topics. And they had to each player had to identify 2 clips, and the player walked through their clips as to why and what it showed. What elements of defending in the front 60 it showed, what elements of defending in the back 40 it showed, and why they picked that clip. And it was awesome. Yeah.
That's all the analytics coming into piece then, where you're literally counting successes versus attempts and looking at why we do this, why we don't do this. And of course that becomes not about, I think, it's more about here's what we're actually doing.
Right.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, and it gives you something to measure other than just outcome, right? So if we're going to say, hey, we want to win the ball back, we call it 60 and 60. 60% of the time we want to win the ball back in the front 60. Well, that's a stat that we can look at and measure. And yes, game to game, and depending on how the style of that people play, that could be easier said than that. That could be easy to do it. Let's say against Nebraska, whose restraining line is at the mid stripe. It can be harder against someone else, but it gives you, are we getting better at our defending in the front 60 if we're winning the ball in that area? In the same way, we don't want to turn the ball over in the back 40. We talk about back 40 turnovers; those are bad. And so it gives you analytics to look at that just give you targets and ways to measure success that are different than just we scored more goals than they did.
When you've got players who are struggling a little bit, I'm curious how you deal with them. You're watching and they're just not on. How are you dealing with that from the sidelines?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think the thing to me is, if you're connected to that player, you probably already know what's going on in terms of, is there something else going on off the field? Is it, can you did she miss a shot and that's going to send her into a tailspin? But and again, I think if it's not effort, if someone's trying and they're not succeeding, then I think it's, what can I do to facilitate that? And again, are they struggling technically, tactically, physically, or psychologically? And depending on, what that is, are they, just technically really struggling today? Can you get them to focus on one simple thing? Hey, just connect the next pass. Just connect the next pass. Don't try to do too much. It's not, is it time to bring them off and keep them from struggling and let them regroup and whatever and get back on in the second half and be ready to do that? Is the partnerships not right? So one of the things that I'm sure you've probably heard of Verhagen, that does kind of does periodization. And I think his stuff is very good. I think he's a little unrealistic about how it applies in the college game. But one of the things that he said in one of his presentations that I was really have kind of taken and used is that relationships are really kind of the first order of soccer, more so than fitness, more so than technical or tactical in this way, right? When you put a national team together, you could have all of the best players, but because they haven't played together at all, there could be real disconnects and the game could look really ugly because they don't have a relationship on the field. And so it's kind of changed my substitution patterns. We might, instead of, bringing a forward off and one on and then this one off and this one on, I might bring both forwards off that play together all the time and put in the two quote unquote reserve forwards that train together all the time and let them, because now they have a relationship on the field. So are the relationship right? Is the role different? Is the opponent doing something that's really taking away what she does really well, and can I move her somewhere that would allow her to do that and eliminate some of the frustration that she's having? So, because can I make a tactical adjustment that's going to help her? We had a player, Katie Murray, who I could say, hey, Katie, get Kelly Mayday the ball over the top and let her run onto one so that she starts to feel good. I mean, Katie Murray was one of those players. She would solve it for you. This player's getting frustrated, so I'm going to give her a ball I know she can have some success with, and that'll get her back in the game. So you're really fortunate if you have someone like that. But, I think there's no one solution, Tom, to that question. The real answer is get connected enough to your players that you know what will help them when they're struggling. And it's different for every single player that you might have.
Is it fair to say the last resort is just to say you're not having a good day, get off and sit down? That you're going to give them some time to work through it within the game first?
And again, I think it depends on the time of the game. I think it depends on, kind of the history of that player. If it only happens occasionally and that has worked to get her off and let her kind of regroup and get her back on, then yes. If it's somebody who, tends to kind of feed off of kind of, if I make a mistake, I think that depends. And then here's the other thing that you're always balancing also is how fair is it to the rest of the team to leave someone on who's struggling if you have a player on the bench who might be able to step in and raise the level and help the players around them. So I think that's always a tough decision. It's really hard to pull a player off when you know that she's struggling. But if that's the best decision for the team, then you've got to make the tough call on that one. And I tell my players all the time, if we won't agree on decisions, I won't agree every time you take a shot. But if you thought that was the best decision for us as a team, and it had nothing to do with your individual scoring record, but you thought that was going to give us the best chance to score, then I'll support that decision because you did it in the best interest of the team. And the same is going to be true for me if I pull someone off the field or put someone in the starting lineup. Trust that I'm doing it because I feel like it's in our best interest, not any other reason other than that. Not because that's my favorite or because they're a senior, or it's because I feel like that's the best decision for the team in that particular moment. And I think I have to remind myself of that sometimes when you're trying to make that compassionate decision. That's difficult.
I'm going to ask this because you're probably one of the strongest personalities I've ever met. So I threw this one in here because it might get taken the wrong way, but I put, given your background as a player, did you ever feel intimidated by coaching against the males? And either way, what allowed you to become your own person? Because clearly you are. So what was that like at the beginning?
Yeah.
Laurie Williams is another one who's on here who's got a personality that doesn't quit either. So she would probably like this question herself.
Yeah, I don't know that I ever felt intimidated coaching against them. And part of that, Tom, I think I probably, prior to getting in the coaching profession, I was in the computer engineering world, which is also a very male-dominated profession, or it was at that time. So I think even in my educational days at Carolina and I took math at the all-boys Catholic school because we didn't have, calculus and physics at Ursuline Academy, the all-girls school. So I had to go to the all-boys school with 2 other girls in this, so I think I've spent, a good bit of time in those worlds where I've competed with, if that's the right word, kind of surrounded by men. So but I will say that I think I wasn't intimidated. I just understood that I probably was going to have to prove myself a little bit more than the next person. So I think it made me make sure, I'll use coaching school, for example. As I was going through the coaching schools, I was uber prepared for whatever it was that I was going to do, because I knew that the standard that I was going to be held to, or the ability to earn respect, was going to really depend on how well I was able to pull off a session, or how thorough I could be. And so I think it forced me to really prepare, because I realized I was kind of be held to a different standard, or was just not going to, be, yeah, she knows her stuff. Whether that was, so I don't think I was intimidated, although I do think I was motivated to really make sure that I was well prepared, and that was true in the classroom when it was all guys and that sort of stuff too, that there was going to be this assumption that maybe I wasn't going to be as good, and so I just had to prove that.
Yeah, I don't think you had too much trouble doing that. That was
Oh, it got easier over time, and again, like I said, it's I think you get used to being in that environment more, and then the other thing I think is you start to realize that I would get in environments, and again, you look around and it's all males, and you kind of assume that they're all coaching men, and you start to realize that you have a whole lot more in common with coaches irrespective of gender, and there are some female coaches that do things this way, and so the gender thing became less and less of an issue. The only time it's really an issue for me now, Tom, is referees.
Interesting.
Donna
Ross was a referee. Watch carefully.
Yeah. Jeff can say things to the officials, to a male official, that I can't say. Don't as a female coach to a male official, I don't get the same response that a male coach gets. So if I'm coaching against a male coach, he gets to say things and influence the referee way more than I do. I think I, as a female coach, am intimidating to a male referee. So that's the only place right now where gender I still feel like there's this very big gender difference in my professional life right now, which is funny.
Interesting. So we have a lot of male. Were you going to ask something, Brad? I've just maybe last question. There's other than Laurie, I think, and whoever else it is. Any advice for the coaches as they try to bring young women into the game if they've got assistant coaches? Are there some guidance you can give them on how they can best keep someone in the game, help them grow, make it so that there's not 3 years and out, 2 years and out?
Right. I think the biggest thing is that you really have to find a way to be yourself as a coach. And, one of the things I think is there are gender differences. I mean, we see the world differently, and there are certain things that, relationships are important. And again, talking in large numbers, but to just embrace what you're good at and what you bring to the table. And don't feel like you have to model yourself after a male coach just to fit into that world, so to speak. That's what you bring to the table is really important, and to not, I guess the word is to not feel guilty that you want to be a mom, want to be all of the things that the life that you have outside of coaching. I talked to Nikki Izzo-Brown, who's got, several children, and I don't have children, so it makes it a little bit less, coming from me, it's not as, but it doesn't matter. And this is the other thing I think I would say, coaching is a huge emotional energy profession. And I think this is where for women, it gets a little bit harder maybe than our male counterparts, because we're such emotional beings for the most part. Is that you really do have to save emotional energy for the other important people in your life, whether that's a spouse or a partner or kids or your parents, or because you can really expend all your emotional energy in the coaching world, and then you step out of that and you've got nothing left for the people that matter in your life. It's not time management that's really important. It's emotional management, and saving some of that emotional energy, especially as a female who wants to come home and have emotional energy for their spouse and their kids. And like you really have to kind of protect a little bit of that. And I think I did that. My family will tell you there was a period of time I was probably pretty emotionally disconnected from them because I was so emotionally into my team, probably in my days at Arkansas. And so I think that's the advice is conserve some emotional energy for yourself and your life outside of soccer. And don't be, don't be ashamed of that. Don't be ashamed of holding off that emotional energy and spending that time. And don't be afraid to ask for the supportive things that you need to be able to do your job. Whether that's, bringing a child on a bus or having your own room so that you can pump your breast milk and take it back, and all these things that you guys are like, whoa, too much. Those are the reality. Our athletic trainer had a baby during the season, and we had to get a little freezer in her hotel room, though, that she could, keep the breast milk and take it back. And, those are the kinds of things that female coaches have to deal with. And you shouldn't be afraid to ask for those kinds of supportive things.
Fantastic. Janet, in respect to your time, I really want to thank you for joining us for the hour. It's great to reconnect. You're one of my role models in soccer, and it's kind of neat. We've had both you and April, and I went to coaching school at April and saw what women soccer players were like, and went, oh, this is good.
It is great. It's great to reconnect. It's been since ODP days, and I laugh every time I whistle. I have to thank Tom for still having a voice, because I spent an entire summer in ODP I have to still use 4 fingers though, Tom. I need to get to the 2, but I spent a whole summer kind of spitting on myself with Tom giving me hints on how to learn how to whistle. And now that I can, and I won't because I break your eardrums, it has saved my throat. And, I could whistle across campus and the players would know it was me and turn and look and say, where's Coach Rayfield? But I always give credit. I'm like, oh, Tom Turner taught me how to whistle one summer at ODP. So I appreciate that, having that skill. It has made life a whole lot easier on my voice, that's for sure.
I actually broke down and bought one, the real one, so that's even better yet. But anyway,
Yeah.
So thank you everybody for being with us. Thank you, Brad, for working the background, and Janet, have a safe summer, everybody.
Oh, thank you guys all, and I just want to say, just to get on and to spend this time, and I know everybody says during COVID we've got all this time in the world. I don't think that's the truth, but to get on and spend your time trying to improve yourself for your players, I just applaud you for taking the time to do something that's you're trying to improve yourself so that you can improve your players, and that says something about you as a coach. So appreciate you spending the time here as well.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Janet.
Stay safe.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Yeah, thank you. I see everybody. Thanks, Janet. That's great.
You bet.